Hey guys, Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist here in Bali, Indonesia, one of the big Nomad hubs in Ubud, and hanging out in a little villa with some folks I've had the privilege to help over the last year who work in the Amazon FBA and e-commerce and information product space, help them get their taxes down, and wanted to follow up on a video that we did recently about why you shouldn't set your company up in Singapore. Now, I think that Singapore's a great place, and there are plenty of applications for a Singapore company, but I said for the kind of people that I'm hanging out with here, if you're an Amazon FBA, if you're coaching, consulting, e-commerce, info products, one-man band of any kind, Singapore is probably not the most efficient, least expensive, easiest option for you. There are probably better options, and while Singapore is great, it's probably not for the kind of people we're talking to at Nomad Capitalist in most cases. We got a lot of pushback on that. A lot of people loved it as well, but we have some people, some of whom are in the industry of promoting Singapore, others who just like Singapore, who didn't really like the fact that I would say, hey, Singapore is not the panacea that it's made out to be. And so I wanted to posit the question in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, is Singapore dead? Because when it comes to company formation, I don't quite see the value, as I said in the other video, which you can find on YouTube. I don't see the value unless you're running a big operation and you want a big office somewhere. Then it makes sense. For everyone else, not so much. I don't see the value in a lot of things left in Singapore. So banking. Love banking in Singapore. Excellent banks. I recommend one or two that still accept foreign clients in some cases, but most Singaporean banks don't accept foreign clients, so it's very difficult to bank in Singapore. Immigration. I'd be all for it. I think a residence permit in Singapore would be fantastic. But we wrote an article about a year and a half ago now about how the process has become extremely difficult and you need millions of dollars, or you need to be an entrepreneur who's basically trying to go in and cure cancer and you've got lots of Singapore VC money. So immigrating into Singapore has been very difficult. And I first mentioned that was going to happen 3.5 years ago. So banking, immigration, company formation, all these things in Singapore have been very difficult. And so is Singapore dead? Of course not. Singapore's a great place. If you have lots of money, great place to go. But I'm not talking to the Peter Thiels of the world, who got his New Zealand passport by investing $1 gazillion down there. I'm talking to the Amazon FBA, guys who are making $500,000, $1 million a year, $250,000, $2 million, somewhere in that range. And they're constantly reinvesting the money. So that's really who we talk to, young entrepreneurs here at Nomad Capitalist who probably don't have $5 million to move to Singapore. So Singapore, of course, is not dead, but Singapore has evolved. And when people ask, Andrew, how do I fit Singapore into my plans? There may be a bank that we can send them to. But in general, Singapore has become so developed that they can raise their requirements for pretty much everything. They can raise the requirements to open a bank account and afford to be picky. They can raise the requirements for immigrating there, whether it's as an entrepreneur or an investor. They can raise the requirements for starting a company or doing anything there. They can afford to. They don't need you. They don't need me. They don't need any of us. Singapore is doing very well. The trick, as I've been saying for 3 years now, since 2014, is finding the next Singapore. And I think that some people don't necessarily want to grab onto this idea. They want to just, okay, there's got to be some loophole I can get into Singapore. I use my 5 magic words, go where you're treated best for a reason. If you want to spend the rest of your life figuring out how to find a loophole to get into Singapore, God bless you. If you want to figure out a place that's like Singapore, that has all the things that made Singapore great, that makes forming a company really easy and cheap, or that offers great banks that are stable and service is great and you can rely on them, or a place that allows you to immigrate and gives you a great experience of living there, getting a residence permit, getting a passport in the future, you can find those things in other places. I mentioned this for the first time 3 years ago when I was in South Korea, and they had started to raise their requirements as a developed economy. Singapore, since then, has raised a number of its requirements. Singapore is still a great place for the wealthy, but if you're just getting started, or if you're just kind of, on that upward slope where you've got a business and you're reinvesting in it and you don't have a ton of money just to go and throw into investments somewhere, or, you don't want to pay tax any more than you have to, Singapore may not be for you, but there are other countries. This is why I'm always looking for the next Singapores, what we call the next safe havens, the new safe havens, the Georgias, the Montenegros, the Malaysias. There's tons of them we talk about, Colombias. And not all these safe havens that we've talked about over the years will be good for banking or company formation or residence or all of them, right? But the idea that we have to cling to what worked 5 years or 10 years ago is dangerous. Singapore is still a place that you can go if you meet their high requirements. But there are other places that have the same principles that want to be Singapore and may or may not become the next Singapore that you can get in now at a much lower price point without the hassle, without the large investments, without the requirements. And so at Nomad Capitalist, we talk to you about going to those places, finding where you can get the best parts of Singapore somewhere where it's a lot easier, and potentially ride the train all the way up. You never know. Will Georgia be the next Singapore? Who knows? There's obviously a risk. Singapore, you can go, you can invest $5 million, get a residence permit. You know it's Singapore, probably always will be. Will Georgia be Singapore? Will it get halfway to Singapore status? Who knows? But you sure as heck don't need anywhere near $5 million to get in there. And for me, as a young entrepreneur who wants to be cautious with my cash and who advises people who are very cautious about their cash because they're reinvesting it in their businesses, it's much better to find those next Singapores. Maybe you get 2 or 3 of them. That's the idea of planting flags. That's why I think Singapore, while I love it, doesn't play as big of a role today for entrepreneurs and young people as it did 3 or 5 or 10 years ago.